In Hastings and Prince Edward District School Board, we are leading with professional learning. Our board improvement plan for student achievement is based on an inquiry question where we ask ourselves about the impact of collaborative professional learning on student engagement and student achievement. We've set about to measure and monitor our progress as a learning organization through the collection of data from learning teams across the system through monitoring questions identified in our board improvement plan.
As we monitor our board improvement plan through our monitoring questions, the one question asks about what is the impact of collaborative teaching and learning on my practice. And we have gathered that data through K-12 learning teams, and what we have discovered is that people are telling us that they have increased confidence in their instructional practices. They have a deeper understanding of how to connect their instructional practice to urgent student learning needs, and that as over time they continue to build relationships both within their school team and cross-panel. And it has been proven to be really impactful in moving our practice, because we are now seeing the importance of moving from my need as a teacher learning to what is that urgent student need that I have in front of me.
So one of the things that we have really started to think about is how we can use different sources of data to inform our BIPSA. So something that we've done is have BIPSA monitoring questions that allow us to look at a more qualitative data source rather than all just quantitative. So that's been a really interesting process for us, and how they're reading to us now as we start to look through them is they're really the learning stories or the learning journeys of our schools that have been involved in collaborative inquiry or collaborative professional learning. And it's been a really interesting process for us because we take a look at all of the data that we get, and we sit down in teams from our curriculum services department and read all of the responses from each school, analyze them for themes based on what we are hoping to get from our questions, and then draw bigger themes out of each question analysis to help us feed forward into our next BIPSA cycle. So it's a really good opportunity for everyone in our curriculum services department to get a sense of where our schools are at, and then where we as a system and then at individual school levels as well need to move to next. So some of the evidence that we're getting from our schools sounds like this, and this has been very exciting for us. Through guided groupings and a particular focus on the skills needed, students showed growth in many of the areas. This was obvious through observations as well as retesting on particular skills using the PAT test. So when we hear those specific learning journey stories, it really helps us to identify where we need to put some more supports and where we're well on our way.
So as a school principal, I found it really effective to use the monitoring questions because we could streamline the monitoring questions into our regular conversations and discussion about what we were doing and learning. So then when it came to the end of our professional learning cycle, people really were able to dig into what they had been doing together and were able to really reflect on the journey that they had been part of. So the monitoring questions really helped open up the dialogue for all of the learners.
One of the questions we had as the BIPSA team was coming together was, how do I know that my instructional practices are having an impact on the achievement and engagement of my students? So the comments we received from elementary teachers included that students were showing growth in many of the areas where they were learning, and that was through observation as well as retesting on particular skills. So there are a number of things to look at to know if engagement is happening, even besides formal testing. And we have to make sure as well that our assessment and instructional strategies are what they need to be sure that we know that what we're doing with our board improvement plan is having the impact not only on achievement but on engagement as well.
One question that I'm having, Catherine, about the impact of instructional practices on student achievement and engagement is the way that we gather the evidence of said achievement and engagement. How do we know that students are doing and feeling connected to the classroom? Are they participating as fully and as successfully as they possibly can? What kind of evidence would demonstrate to us that students are experiencing school in the best ways possible? What are we looking for as teachers and as district leaders as evidence of that achievement?
I have the same wondering, and another layer on that, I think, is sometimes I wonder when we're looking at engagement and achievement, if sometimes we lump that together as one piece. So I'm wondering if we separate the engagement piece and, as you said, specifically look at what does that look like, what does it sound like, and then look at the achievement piece. What are we looking for? What does that look like? What should that sound like? And then how do we mesh the two together?
I agree with you. Figuring out exactly what achievement and engagement can look like and how we can measure it. My next question would of course be, how do we build on what we already know about the degree to which students are engaged and the degree to which they are achieving? How does that inform our classroom practices? How does that inform the social and physical instructional environments that we provide to our kids? Achievement and engagement go hand in hand, but in some ways I think that we have to learn how to look at the two in a slightly different fashion through a slightly different lens so that we can best serve the needs of our kids.
I agree, and I'm also wondering if maybe that's where that important reflection piece comes in. So when we take a look at the concrete evidence that we have for each of those things, as well as for those things together, and then not only that, but what's missing from that concrete piece of evidence, and then if we reflect on that, how can we take those reflections and then help to drive that instruction forward?
Another piece of our process in looking at our qualitative data that has been new for us this year is beyond just our team analysis and looking for themes, we thought it might be a good idea to reach to someone outside who doesn't know our story and our context to see if they are seeing the same things in our data that we are. Because what we understand from looking at some of the resources like intentional interruptions is that we all bring bias to our work. And we weren't sure if we were bringing our bias into some of the data that we were collecting from our schools. So we consulted with an outside or external researcher and gave her all of our raw data to look through. And it was a risk. It was a big risk for us because we really wanted to see, were we seeing what other people would see in our data? And thank goodness, when it all came back together, there were similarities between what the outside researcher, who by the way is not an educator, so didn't come with all of the lingo and all of that, that we were wondering, are we bringing some words to the data that aren't there? So our external researcher was able to read through and pull out themes, and then we sat down and compared the themes that we saw from our curriculum services teams with themes from the researcher, and there was a lot of similarity between the two, which was really reaffirming to our process that we're using internally in pulling out the themes from the BIPSA monitoring questions that help us guide where we go next with our BIPSA.
The purpose of collecting the qualitative data from the teachers is really an important process that we undertake at Hastings Prince Edward District School Board. And we can see the parallel of that teacher story come out, and that's really what we're hooking into. And when I think about what we're doing with our early educators and having that pedagogical documentation really inform our practice, it is an exact parallel on our system level.
Similar to the way our classrooms work, when we set those conditions for learning, students are willing to take risks and continue to further their learning and explore. We have learned through our monitoring that our teachers say the same, that when we set the right conditions for their learning and collaborative professional learning teams, that then they are willing to take those risks and work together towards supporting and figuring out how to support student needs in the classroom.
Through our monitoring questions and our analysis of our work as a learning organization, we are establishing a culture that is open to learning, open to taking risks, and identifying our challenges and our next wonderings and our next questions, and approaching those challenges with a growth mindset. Our practice is to take these questions back and share them with educators across the system, to analyze this information along with student achievement data and use both of those sources as feedback to inform our revisions to our next board improvement plan strategies.